The last dance of the Sakura. Beneath the blooming cherry trees, Kyoto that morning looked like a city caught between dream and memory. Petals drifted gently through the air, settling on damp stone pavements and on the sleeves of passing strangers. The sound of shamisen strings floated from a narrow lane in the Gion district, where the scent of incense mingled with the steam rising from pots of miso soup. Aika sat before a low mirror as the house mother of the Okiya, Madame Sumiko, dusted the final layer of white rice powder across her face. "Do not blink," she whispered, dipping a fine brush into crimson pigment before painting Aika's lips in the shape of a plum blossom. Her eyebrows, fine and arched, were drawn with strokes of charcoal like the ink lines of a calligrapher's brush. Over her eyelids, a faint veil of black and gold shadow deepened her gaze, a gaze meant to capture the hearts of men and stir envy in the eyes of women. She slipped into a soft rose-pink kimono embroidered with silver waves and drifting cherry petals. Madame Sumiko tightened the obi sash, a wide band of silk the color of pale blossoms, tying it at the back into the shape of a butterfly. Her hair, black and shining like lacquer, was adorned with delicate kanzashi pins tipped with tiny paper flowers that would sway with her every movement. On the streets outside, guests were already gathering: merchants, samurai descendants, poets, and even a few visiting politicians from Tokyo. They had come for the Hanami dance, a ritual of spring. Aika knew that among them would be Kazuo, her patron. He was a man of quiet elegance, his eyes always measuring worth, whether in silk, porcelain, or the soul of a woman. That morning, as she waited for her turn to step onto the stage, she caught something unfamiliar in his gaze. It wasn't the cool control she had learned to endure. It was a decision, unspoken but certain. The shamisen began its first note. A drum echoed it softly, and the wind scattered another shower of petals through the air. Aika stepped onto the polished wooden stage and began to dance. Her movements were slow, fluid, yet heavy with tradition. The audience was silent, spellbound. In the farthest row, a young man, clearly not part of this world, watched her with an intensity that pierced her heart. She did not know his name, but she felt she would remember his face. Later, she would learn he was called Rinji. And on that day, a single cherry blossom fell into her palm like an omen. The lanterns of Gion glowed like warm embers against the indigo dusk. Their paper shades trembled in the evening breeze, casting soft halos of light over the narrow stone streets. From somewhere deep within the district came the faint clink of shamisen strings being tuned, the rustle of silk on wooden floors, and the low hum of male voices softened by sake. Aika walked behind Madame Sumiko, her geta sandals tapping lightly against the pavement. The night air carried the mingled scents of grilled eel, sweet soy glaze, and the faint trace of incense from the afternoon's festival. Inside the tea house, the world shifted. It was dim, warm, and heavy with the perfume of camellia oil. Guests knelt on tatami mats, speaking in lowered tones. Kazuo sat near the alcove where a single scroll hung, a brush painting of a solitary crane, and a vase held 3 perfect plum blossoms. He was drinking sake from a small porcelain cup, his movements deliberate, as if each gesture were part of a ritual. "Aika," he said as she bowed, her forehead nearly touching the tatami. "You danced with grace today. The petals seemed to follow your steps." She murmured her thanks, seating herself beside Madame Sumiko, eyes lowered as custom demanded. But Kazuo's gaze lingered on her, not in the way it once had, that careful weighing, the ownership that had defined their years together, but with a curious distance. He poured sake into her cup himself, a rare gesture. "You have a gift," he said quietly. "A gift wasted if it remains hidden here." Her heart thudded once, sharply. It was unlike him to speak so plainly. Before she could answer, the sliding door opened. A man entered, tall for a Japanese, wearing a dark tailored suit that spoke of Tokyo, not Kyoto. The lamplight caught the angular lines of his face and the faint gleam in his eyes. "Renji." He crossed the room, bowed politely to the guests, and took a seat a few mats away. Yet when Aika's gaze lifted for the briefest moment, his eyes found hers, steady, searching, as if he'd been waiting for this chance since the festival. Kazuo spoke again, his tone low but firm. There may come a day soon when I will no longer hold you here, Aika. I will see to it you have the choice, to walk beyond these walls. The words were like a spark in the stillness. She lowered her eyes quickly, hiding the sudden tremor in her hands. But Renji's gaze did not waver. Somehow, she knew, whatever awaited her, he would be part of it. The next afternoon, the streets of Gion were quieter. The festival crowds had thinned, leaving only the sound of a distant temple bell and the occasional rattle of a cart wheel over the stones. Petals from yesterday's blossoms still clung to the edges of the gutters, forming pale pink pools that swirled in the breeze. Aika walked slowly along the Shirakawa Canal, her sleeves brushing the wooden rail as she passed. Madame Sumiko had given her a rare moment of solitude between engagements, a kindness disguised as an errand. She carried a small parcel of tea leaves, though she suspected her true task was simply to be seen. Geisha were as much a part of Kyoto's beauty as its temples. She stopped beneath a flowering sakura whose branches arched low over the water. The reflection of its blossoms shimmered in the current, and for a moment she imagined herself dissolving into that image. No name, no duty, no history. Aika-san. She turned. Renji stood a few paces away, dressed not in the formal suit from last night but in a dark haori jacket over plain hakama trousers. The change made him seem less a man of Tokyo and more a part of the street around them. You dance as though you've lived the music, he said, his voice even but threaded with something like awe. She inclined her head, unsure how much propriety to shield herself with. It is my work to know the music, Renji-san. He stepped closer, careful not to breach the space that tradition demanded between them. I am not here as a guest of the tea house today. I am here as a filmmaker. From his sleeve, he produced a small photograph, a still frame of a woman in kimono, caught mid-turn in a shaft of light. It took her a moment to recognize the image as herself from yesterday's performance. I want you to be in my next film, he said simply. Not as a geisha performing for an audience, but as a woman living her own story. Her breath caught. The words were dangerous. A geisha belonged to her house, her patrons, and her role. To step outside that was not merely ambition, it was defiance. She began to reply, but the breeze shifted, scattering petals between them like pale snow. Renji didn't look away. I believe you were meant for more than to bow and pour tea for men who will forget your name. Aika felt the weight of his gaze, and behind it, the faint echo of Kazuo's words from the night before. There may come a day soon when I will no longer hold you here. She closed her fingers around the photograph. When such a day comes, she said quietly, I will remember what you've asked of me. Renji's smile was not triumphant, but certain. Then I will be waiting. Rain fell softly over Kyoto that morning, turning the stone streets into ribbons of silver. In the Okiya, the air was warm with the scent of wet silk drying on bamboo racks. The other women moved quietly, their conversations hushed, glances darting toward the closed doors of Madame Sumiko's study. Aika knelt alone in the preparation room, folding away the pale kimono she had worn for an early engagement. The steady patter of rain made the world outside feel far away, as if time itself were pausing. The sliding door opened. Madame Sumiko entered, her expression unreadable. Kazuo-sana wishes to see you, she said simply. Aika followed her through the narrow corridor to the reception room. Kazuo sat on a cushion before a low lacquered table, his posture as impeccable as ever. A teapot steamed gently between them. Sit, he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made her pulse quicken. She obeyed, folding her hands neatly in her lap. I have watched you these past years, Kazuo began, his eyes on the teacup he was filling. I have seen the precision of your dance, the discipline in your bearing. But I have also seen something else, the way your gaze sometimes strays beyond these walls. Aika lowered her eyes. Forgive me, Kazuo-sana. My duty is here. Perhaps, he said, but duty should not be a cage. He paused, letting the words settle. I am releasing you from your contract. Her head lifted sharply. You would set me free? You have given me beauty and loyalty, he said. In return, I give you the chance to choose the life you wish to live. His gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. Do not waste it. The room was silent except for the rain. Aika felt the floor steady beneath her and yet tilt all at once. Freedom, the word she had not dared to speak aloud, was suddenly real, and it was terrifying. Madame Sumiko appeared at the doorway, her face betraying nothing, though Aika could sense the ripple this decision would cause in the household. Kazuo poured the last of the tea into her cup and slid it toward her. When you leave here, he said, do so with your head held high. You will not return as property, but perhaps as a guest. Aika bowed deeply, her forehead nearly touching the tatami. When she rose, she felt the weight of the moment pressing against her ribs. Somewhere in the city, she knew, Renji was waiting. And now, for the first time, she could choose to go to him. The rain had passed by morning, leaving Kyoto washed in a pale, luminous light. The stones of Gion still glistened, and the air smelled faintly of earth and cedar. Aika walked without the careful, measured pace of a geisha on duty. Her gait clacked against the wet pavement in a rhythm that was entirely her own. Renji's studio was hidden at the end of a narrow lane near the Shirakawa Canal, marked only by a wooden sign with faded calligraphy. She hesitated at the door, hearing faint voices inside, and for a moment she nearly turned back. But she reminded herself, she had no master to answer to now. Inside, the space was dim, the walls lined with rolls of film, stacks of storyboards, and a scattering of props, fans, lanterns, a shamisen leaning in the corner. The scent was not of incense but of developing chemicals, sharp and metallic. Renji emerged from behind a folding screen, sleeves rolled, his hair slightly disheveled. You came, he said, as if there had never been any doubt. I wish to see what it is you do, Aika replied. He gestured toward a low table where a single camera sat, its polished brass catching the light. This is my shamisen, he said with a smile. The instrument I use to tell stories. She approached, curiosity overcoming her reserve. The camera's glass eye stared back at her, unblinking, almost judgmental. It feels different, she murmured, from an audience. It is, Renji said. An audience watches for an evening. The camera remembers forever. He invited her to sit on a small platform, a sheet of plain silk draped behind her. Do not perform, he said gently. Just be. The first click startled her, a sudden, precise capture of breath, light, and presence. Renji lowered the camera, studying her. You carry more in your stillness than most can in 1,000 gestures. For the next hour, he guided her through scenes, walking slowly past a paper screen, turning toward an imagined window, letting the silk of her sleeve catch the light. There was no music, no applause, only the soft whir of the camera and the quiet sound of her own heartbeat. When they finished, he set the camera aside and poured them both tea. Aika, he said, his voice calm but deliberate, there is a part in my new film that was meant for another actress. But now I see it belongs to you, if you are willing to step into it. She looked into her cup, the steam curling upward like a question. Freedom had come so quickly, but here was its first real test. I will need time, she said softly. Renji nodded, as though he had expected that answer.